It's amazing to be in a room full of women. It's brilliant. So thank you ever so much for joining us. So this talk came out of a talk I was asked to give for our women's network at DEFRA, because somebody told them I was good at having difficult conversations. And it went really well, and I learned lots actually, so I'm sure I'm going to learn lots from you, because there must be a lot of wisdom and experience about difficult conversations in this room. I don't think any of us stop finding them difficult, they just are sometimes. So I'm Harriet Wallace, I'm from DEFRA.
I'm Holly Yates, I'm also from DEFRA.
Yes, and we've been working together for a while and quite enjoy doing stuff together, which is why we thought we'd do this as a double act today, because it'll be more fun. But we would like to hear from you during the session, because we've got some thoughts, but you will have a lot of thoughts as well. Okay, so first of all, can we this is the outline of the session. We're going to do a little bit of thoughts from you, then some thoughts from us, and then we'll discuss and hopefully have a bit of time for just a bit of trying things out in pairs, because it's a good place to play with different approaches to what you might use usually. So I think let's get into the toolkit and pointers, and then we'll come back to discussing some of this and playing with it a bit more later on. So, truth and power. So some of you have raised this already. Challenging people can feel uncomfortable. It can feel uncomfortable for you, and it can feel uncomfortable for them. And people have already mentioned, you worry that people don't like to hear negative messages, and will they really hear you? So all of that is true, but at the same time, sometimes it's not kind or professional to dodge the issue. Like, as I said, there's been times when I wished people had given me feedback sooner and they didn't, and I felt a bit let down that they hadn't said to me, because actually I'd rather have heard it. So these kind of tensions and responsibilities in both directions. And one thing we've been playing with a bit as we've been chewing this over, and Holly came up with this because she's great at using books and stories and pictures, is The Emperor's New Clothes, which is a really interesting story in this sort of space, right? The emperor who's been tricked into believing he's wearing a magnificent suit and is actually walking around the streets stark naked. And everybody around him can see it, but they're all a bit worried that they might be the only one who can't see the magic of it, and that they're going to make themselves look silly when everybody is signing up to this, and they don't know how to raise it with him, and it takes a child to go, look, no pants. And I think it's a really interesting kind of story to play with in this space of what are your alternatives to either saying nothing or saying, look, no pants.
And this so for a long time before I joined the civil service, I worked in the voluntary sector. And in the voluntary sector, we talked a lot about speaking truth to power, to the extent that I actually started feeling quite uncomfortable about it, because I was a little bit kind of like, well, hang on a minute, but who has the power in this situation, and who actually knows the truth? And it's nearly always more complicated than you think. And mainly we were talking about telling the government off. And then having to come in as a civil servant, one of the hardest things for me was, God, I love the moral high ground. I mean, it was a lovely, lovely place to live. And as soon as life is a little bit more complicated, you have to do a lot more difficult messaging. And I think that was partly where the whole kind of Emperor's New Clothes thing came from. And when I started picture researching this presentation. Hard to find images that were totally appropriate for the workplace. But also, the more I looked at it, the more I felt like the victim in this story is the emperor. Here's this guy, he's getting shockingly bad advice, and he ends up horribly exposed. And there's a funny dynamic going on there, because actually, notionally he has the power. Other people have the truth, they don't dare tell him. But on the other hand, when you're walking through town with no scanties on, that doesn't feel like a very powerful position. And I think one of the themes that comes up through this is really thinking in the difficult conversation, what's the power dynamic? Is it difficult because I'm speaking to a member of staff who is going to feel resentful and I need to manage them and that's challenging? Is it difficult because I need to tell a minister something that they'd really rather not hear? That's my job, but I'm very concerned about that long-term relationship. Is it difficult because this is my peer who I actually really like and respect, but this one thing is becoming a real problem, and if they don't hear it from me, who will they hear it from? And so part of what we wanted to get into was, how do you handle that? How do you think through the power dynamic? And actually, when this came up, Harriet asked for some feedback on her initial thoughts, and I said, you're the perfect person to do this. because you are the person best able to say, yeah, that's great. Are you feeling a bit chilly? And not go, look no pants. I'm look no pants. That's always my default position. And I think one of the things in this that really resonated for me was pause and respond, don't react. And I am woman most likely to go in like a velociraptor as soon as something presses my button, and then afterwards think, I think I could have handled that better.
Yes, exactly. So you know, one of the things to think about and play with is, can you take your own ego out of it a bit? Can you retain perspective? Can you keep breathing? Can you keep assessing the situation? Not get drawn into the emotion, not get drawn into yours or theirs actually, and just allow yourself a bit of time to go, I've been thinking about this. Yeah, that is tricky. Shall we look at it together and not feel that you've got to be reactive, because then you've got more time to kind of judge it and kind of take the temperature down. So we're going to play with this a little bit more. I mean, the first kind of thing that's really important in all of this, whenever you have the opportunity, is that if you've got strong human relationships, this all becomes easier, right?
I know they're cats, but...
Well, yes. When I did a job on international stuff, and I remember getting some brilliant feedback from my then boss, who said, don't just go in and talk to them straight about the work thing. You know, talk to them about their kids, talk to them about hobbies, doesn't matter what it is, but find a way to make a human connection, and then from there it's much easier to go, oh yeah, that thing, it's a bit tricky, can we talk about that? And I've made this a real kind of practice. So like when I work with peers across government, we don't meet in some stuffy meeting room. I go for a coffee and we walk around the park and we chat about stuff, and you know, try to kind of get to know each other a bit. And then what I tend to say is, great, I think we know where we are. You know, I know what you care about. You know what I care about. Can I phone you if there's something difficult we need to talk about? And then it's all easier. Now, you don't always have that opportunity, but if you can start by building those kinds of relationships with other human beings, the rest of it, you know, is in a much easier place. So, if we imagine that we're in a scenario where you've got something you think you ought to say, and you're just assessing before you go straight in, because I've had plenty of times in my life where I've gone straight in and then I thought, oh, that was a bit stupid, wasn't it? So let's assume that we've all sensibly paused. You know, I think there's then a moment to think, like, what is it I'm really trying to say here? What is it that I want to get across, and why? Why? Where is that coming from? And really, this is back to your point about what's the outcome I want to achieve here. You know, is it because I think something's going on that's morally wrong? Is it because I think I owe it to this person to tell them something I haven't realised? Or what? And really kind of working that through as the foundation. And then there's another really important question, is whether, like, is it really worth it? Because we all know that there are some people who won't listen. We all know that there are some situations where it's just not going to be sensible to be the kid that says, look, no pants. And I'm not saying that's always the right answer. It often isn't the right answer, but I think it's worth having that question of, okay, I know what and I know why, but just there is a yes-no decision here. And then there's a question of when. So I've worked with people who are really grumpy when they're hungry.
That's me.
Not only my children, some ministers I've known. Or are they having a bad day? Or is it a week where there's some really difficult thing happening? Is it a good time to have it? Do you need to signal something? Do you say, no, I'd like to have a chat with you about this thing, but can we put in a slot? Or is it good to catch them when it's a relaxed moment? So just thinking, or is it a formal thing where you need a formal meeting? So just, you know, what's an approach that's going to make it more likely to be possible to have a good conversation? I think we're over to you now, Holly.
So, I think this goes back to the kind of personal human relationships, but it's also thinking a little bit about the power dynamic and the hierarchy and what roles you're respectively in, because that makes a massive difference to how you present it. There's a real question about whether or not that person is able to hear that message well, which kind of goes to the point Harriet was just making about whether and when. but also, are they able to hear that message well from you? So I've been having a conversation just this week with my director about a senior colleague who is intervening in a policy area in a way that may not be optimally helpful. There's a conversation to be had about that, and there's a real question about who is best placed to do that, who does it best come from, and it's really worth thinking that through. So power dynamic, what's the relationship? Will they shoot the messenger? So again, this is my picture research. I was looking into emperors and empresses, and this is a Russian lady, relative of Catherine the Great, used to shoot people when they got on her land. If you're going to have a difficult conversation with her, you probably need to plan the tactics quite carefully, and you might want somebody to intercede on your behalf. And the converse actually is probably the bit that I personally find more difficult. I find it less challenging to talk to somebody who might shout me down or shoot me down. If I think somebody might burst into tears, then I am the world's biggest wuss. I find that really, really difficult to do. And so, again, that's about knowing who's got the power, and if it's me, how I'm going to use that and how I'm going to carry it lightly and be humane in the discussion, because there's no point making somebody go away feeling bruised. On the other hand, sometimes you do have to have the difficult conversation.
Yes. And this also plays into sort of how do you go at it, right? Do you go very direct, or do you go slightly sideways? So, I've been experimenting with slightly sideways with my children. And last summer I had a brilliant triumph, which was, didn't last, but while it lasted it was great, where I said to them, oh, did you know that your friends always get themselves dressed in the morning on their own? And I just left it. And they started doing it. And if I'd told them to do it or asked them to do it, they would have gone, oh, I want you to do it, Mum, and made a big fuss. But because they decided it for themselves, it had kind of mulled in their heads. They were like, oh, okay, we're going to do it. So sometimes sideways is more effective.
And over the years, I've seen that work very well with a variety of ministers. So did you know that in Canada, they're a long way ahead of us on this? Did you know that the Dutch are really leading the way internationally in this space? That can be quite a good way to land an idea that might otherwise be less palatable.
Exactly. So, for example, I have worked with ministers who think that regulation is a very bad thing, and that you should just do voluntary approaches. And there was an occasion where I thought, voluntary is not going to get us far enough, but I don't think the minister's going to hear that well from me, because I might just come across as a civil servant who wants to use a regulatory stick all the time. So, but I knew there were some people in the industry who thought that regulation was right, because otherwise, the responsible companies would do the right thing and their competitors would undercut them. So I got the minister to go and meet those people and chew it over from a business perspective, and it changed the minister's view. But I don't think I would have been the right person to deliver that message, because it wouldn't have been heard so well. So this is back to our sort of, how is the person going to receive it? Can we find a way for them to receive your message with dignity, which is where kind of going sideways or thinking about who and your setup can all be really helpful. There's your classic kind of starting with the positive, constructive, these things are going really well, that's great. However, there is this other thing. I think there's something really powerful about depersonalising it. So trying to look at the issue, not at the person. This thing's a bit tricky, can we look at it together? The issue is over there. It's not between you and the person you're talking to. It's not you against them, but you're kind of going, there's this tricky thing, let's look at it. And then it just sort of takes the emotion down a bit. And not feeling that you've necessarily got to come up with all the answers or be on the spot, but that you can kind of walk through a conversation. Working in coaching mode, it's a little bit like what I was talking about with my children and trying to get them to dress themselves. Asking questions. I noticed that that's something that we should maybe, do you think we should think about that? People will mostly believe stuff more and act on it more if they've reached the conclusion themselves than if you tell them, in my experience. You know what it's like, somebody tells you something and even if they're right, it's really annoying. Whereas if you get the chance to think it through for yourself, it can it feels better and it gives you a bit more time to process it. There's something about framing it constructively, there's something about giving people a dignified place to go so that they don't feel win-lose. And then, you know, planting a thought or highlighting an impact. You know, oh, if we do this, do you think it's going to cost those people money, or do you think these people are going to react badly? Stop. Let them digest it. So there's lots of different ways to do these things, which come between look no pants and silence, but aren't. And then, you know, different ways to try attacking it. And then another thought is like, what's your manner and what's your body language? You know, do you come very formal because it's a formal thing? Are you going to dress more softly? Are you going to, you know, behave in a formal way or a friendly way? There's different ways to play it which set up different dynamics. So, you know, when I've done difficult external stakeholder meetings, which I have expected to be very, you can't hear, when I've done very difficult external stakeholder meetings, sometimes I deliberately dress softly because it feels more friendly.
And I think we've all taken like cakes or biscuits to a meeting because having to share food can really break down the barriers. You know, if any of you ever end up coming to a meeting with me because we're having difficult interdepartmental conversations, when I've brought the biscuits, it's because I think it might be hard. But actually, it's quite hard to take an oppositional approach with someone when you're basically kind of, you know, having tea. I think the kind of the depersonalise it thing, I see very senior civil servants do this really well sometimes when they're kind of, they've got that helicopter view, they're stepped right back, and so instead of saying you think this and I think this and we don't agree, they're kind of like, oh, the history of this policy area has been one of, isn't that interesting? And then they're both standing outside it and nobody's got the same kind of personal skin in the game. It's more a conversation about how do you manage those tensions that have been around for a long time. And, you know, I spend a lot of time thinking about things like my manner and body language. I think Harriet's point about say your thing and then pause, sit back. I'm ferocious. I kind of, the more excited I get, the more I lean across the table and the more I drum the table with my hands. And I can imagine that sitting on the other side of that table, sometimes you might just feel a little taken aback. So there is a real thing about just find your centre, ground yourself and stop talking.
Okay, so that's enough from us. You know, so we've talked about why you and they might find the conversation difficult. We've talked about power dynamic, and we've talked about seeing kindness as a strength and vice versa, and different ways to approach it. What we thought we'd do is have a little bit of time for group discussion, and then suggest that in pairs you might just play out a conversation. You can do the Emperor's New Clothes if that's comfortable and makes it fun, or you can bring some other conversation that you're wrestling with at the moment. So any thoughts, examples, you know, brilliant things that people want to share? Last time I did this, there was a woman who'd had a really difficult argument with fishermen where they'd got personal and said, it's you're personally making this impossible. And how, you know, she'd kind of weathered that out with support from colleagues. But what do you think? Yeah.
I personally had to do an informal managing poor performance conversation recently, and I found it really difficult because the person I had to do it to he's very passionate about his job and he really wants to achieve a lot, and he's a lovely person, but he just isn't doing well enough at the moment. And I found that really difficult because although I prepared, I had examples, I did everything you meant to do, I sat there and I felt emotional and I could hear my voice sort of going, and I had to sort of keep sipping water to try and keep myself calm just because I felt so guilty. And I think it's difficult to, like you said about depersonalising, I don't know how to do that.
It's hard
with some people.
It's also not a crime to show emotion. I mean, if I was your passionate member of staff, I'd want to know that you cared enough about me and our relationship to find the conversation difficult.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to, you know, one of the things you can do is, this is really hard. This is a hard conversation to be having because I recognise all these great things about you, and it's because I want you to help you be good.
Yeah.
That I'm, you know, we didn't have to have it. I could have ducked it, but I really thought that you would want to know.
Yeah, I tried to sort of approach it in that way. It kind of results in him more comforting me, which just It's like, it's okay, I'm doing bad. But no, like, I think that is quite hard. With some people, it's a little bit easier because you kind of keep that distance. But when you have got that relationship, it's tough to be a manager and not a friend.
Yeah, it is. And there is also something about sometimes you can't be a friend, right? Sometimes you have to take a bit more distance. And kind of knowing that and accepting it. I guess the other thing I would reflect on that scenario is actually if somebody's not doing very well and they don't understand that that's what's happening and why it's happening, how are they going to learn?
Yeah.
Right? And if so, most people would like to do their jobs well. So there is a bit of like, I owe it to this person to give them information that they can work with. The challenge is to give them something in a way that they can understand, they can digest, and they can go, oh, okay, maybe this job isn't for me, or actually if I work on this skill, I can get better at it. But if no one's telling them, they can end up stuck in not being very effective, and that's a miserable place for them as well.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So there's a bit about, can you reframe it of actually, I know this is hard, but it should be helpful as long as I deliver it with kindness. Do you know what I mean?
Lady over here and then one at the back.
I'm having what feels like the same conversation with someone in team management. I recently found out that I'm not being paid equally to my male peer, who was appointed at exactly the same time as me, at the same grade. And I've raised this, but I totally hear what you're saying about kind of trying to keep emotion out of it, and I am really trying, but it kind of goes one of two ways. One is either I'm too, by trying to kind of keep any emotion out of it, it feels like I'm being too passive and I'm just being told like, oh yeah, we'll sort it out and nothing's happening. And then when I try and be a bit firmer, I'm told to calm down or not be pushy. As you can imagine, it really helps.
Sounds a little bit Serena Williams, no?
Yeah, I haven't smashed anything.
Do you have a black tutu?
No, I'm working on it. I don't know if I can put it off. But I don't know how to move the conversation forward because I feel like every time I bring it up, it's like, oh God, here she goes again. But at the same time, nothing has happened and it's been 6 months.
Interesting.
Go on.
I'm being pushy and...
Just on that topic, is there any value, do you think, to sometimes becoming more forceful in those conversations?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I think there are absolutely places for appropriate use of emotion and anger.
6 months.
But the question is to think, what's the outcome and how are you going to deploy that, rather than just getting cross and losing it, which is obviously not going to be helpful. So there's times when I've done it, I've used anger in meetings when I've kind of gone in and said, guys, I'm really hacked off, this is not okay, and this is why, and this is what I need to see for this to be all right. That is not acceptable. Now that's not losing it, that is using the power of the fact that you're reasonably angry because something is not okay to move it forward.
I think it's very important to explain the reasons why you stick to this or that, or why you're having this conversation. And at the same time, probably I think it would apply to your example and the previous example, what may happen if this is not addressed.
Yep.
Just kind of facts and trying to maybe withdraw that emotion.
Yes.
I think there's something about setting boundaries, and I think there's also something about Harriet was talking earlier about asking a question and then leaving the silence. Deployed correctly, I am extremely unhappy because this is unacceptable, and I'd like now to know what you are going to do about it. That's the ball, it's in your court. I am Serena, but I haven't lost it. And if you're comfortable with the silence, and the trick I would say, and I would deploy it very, very sparingly, is you let that silence sit 4 times longer than you can even bear it, and you will get something back.
And the other thing, have you looked up any of the negotiating theory stuff? Like, this is making me think about what's your best alternative to a negotiated outcome. So it's look it up, which is, okay, so you want this. They either will come to you or they won't. If they don't, what are you going to do? You're going to go get another job or what? So kind of it's about like, what is your, what are the range of scenarios? Sometimes people won't listen and they won't do what you want. You don't have to stay in the situation. Or you can decide that actually I'll give it a go and then I'll accept it. So Do you know what I mean? Putting some
Yeah.
boundaries around it for yourself.
Would you agree that when you're preparing for that difficult conversation, if you think of those alternatives beforehand, that would give you more confidence to actually have that conversation?
Yes, I think it's helpful, and it's helpful to know that you can't control how the other person's going to react. You can affect it, but they'll make their choices.
The script up there that you're following.
Yeah, and so just be prepared for a range of outcomes. Give it your best shot, and
But in this particular instance, I would say there will be formal escalation routes that you can use within an organisation, and using those is professional. So I think it's just about how to move into that. There were some more people further back.
It was just picking up on that last point. When we're talking about this, I think sometimes you shouldn't be afraid to ask for help as well, especially with your example at the front there. That there are places that you can go to get advice or to get support, and you don't always have to have those difficult conversations and carry it all on your own shoulders. And I think sometimes we're a little bit frightened to ask for where that help exists. But anyway.
Yeah, I think you're dead right, and I think there's a kind of wider point which is in all difficult conversations. Is it for you to handle on your own?
Yeah.
Do you have allies? What's the tactically intelligent way to deploy those allies?
Or even just talking your own tactics through with
Yep.
somebody else
Yeah.
who's a little bit objective and can stand outside of that situation.
yes, or role playing it.
Yeah.
I do that sometimes for myself or with others. Okay, let's practice it. I'm going to practice being the person. I'm going to give you some difficult reactions so you can experiment a bit with. I generally then play the most difficult reaction if I'm playing that, because if you're ready for the worst, anything else is going to seem easier, right? But go on to some others. Helen, you want to say something?
Yeah, just a slightly different angle. So I'm quite interested in. There's been a few occasions in the past in discussions with external stakeholders where they've kind of deployed their expert knowledge of an area to kind of make the conversation difficult. So either I'm trying to encourage them to do something they don't want to do, or vice versa. They want government to be seen to be acting on something that for whatever reason we're not going to do. And they've kind of they've tried to sort of bamboozle me with facts and figures and just plough down all of my arguments, basically, all of my kind of points. And it would I'd just be interested in, I think it's something we've talked about in the past a bit, Holly, I'd be interested in your thoughts on kind of how do you get around that? Because when you're talking to the experts, you're not necessarily going to be able to say, well, actually, no, you're wrong, here are the numbers.
I have a suggestion. Get that a lot, because I keep jumping sectors, so I walk around being naive a lot of the time. I will always ask them to say, well, you're standing, I'm not convinced of that line of argument, so you stand in my shoes, can you explain to me, actually convince me how this would work, bearing in mind I don't have the technical knowledge, because at the moment what you're doing is not persuading me, and I really want to understand, so can you find another way of explaining it to me, and push the responsibility back to them to speak in your language.
And also recognise where you're an expert. So they're an expert in their world of techie detail, and we respect that and it's valuable. But you're an expert in the government, its policy and what it wants to do. And quite often in my experience, those difficult conversations with stakeholders are about two people with different views of what the world should be like. And sometimes you can just confront that and say, well, I understand that you would like the world to be like this, but my understanding of where the government is currently going is a world that's more like that. How are we going to work together on it? And just shift it, because a lot of the time it is, and I know some of these people, an argument for a world that is the world that they would craft. It's not necessarily the world they're living in.
There is also something that comes back on in that sort of situation to the respond, don't react. It's very easy to feel like the emperor actually. Oh, I don't know about this. Maybe they know more than me, and then to get sort of into slight self-doubt. The more senior you get, the more you have to be comfortable engaging with people where you've got no idea about the subject. And there is, there's something about knowing that you don't have to know it all to take a sensible view of a situation, knowing that it's okay to ask questions, and knowing that it's all right to say, okay, I can hear what you're saying, but what would you do in my situation because I have these pressures? Or send me that, let our experts look at it. You know, you don't have to just take it at face value. You also don't have to take a view and respond straight away. It's fine to go, that's very interesting, can you put some proper numbers about this? And I know in your world quite often they don't actually send anything of substance. It's more of a negotiating front, right? But quite often they don't really have anything solid that they're willing to share behind it. But it's uncomfortable, that, you know, I've started as a scientist and I like to know my stuff. And, you know, now I'm at a level where I can't know it all. So there is, you know, you've got to sort of allow that to be okay with you sometimes.
I completely subscribe to the idea that's been talked about both at the start of this session and by Claire earlier on about bringing yourself to work and getting to know people on a real human level. But sometimes I find I'm maybe having a difficult conversation with somebody, or it may be in a press situation, and suddenly it's brought back to your own personal life. Mm-hmm. So somebody says something or asks a question about something that it kind of very much goes to the heart of who you are as a person. Mm-hmm. And I find that quite difficult to deal with because part of me wants to give a response because you're being attacked as your core is being attacked, but the other part of me thinks actually I should just return this to the topic for discussion rather than actually be talking about kind of a person. But it's a difficult, I find it a difficult balance because if you shy away from it, then you're kind of not being who you are as a person. But on the other hand, I sort of think, should I be giving an answer to that? I don't know what you...
I think that's really tricky. I mean, I think we're largely here to talk about having difficult conversations in a professional sphere. Yeah. And to be honest, if somebody is responding to you in a professional sphere by attacking you personally, then they're perhaps being less professional than we could wish. I think that nearly always it's probably better to see if you can park the personal attack, even if you confront it and say, I'm not sure we're here today to talk about what I'm like as a person. Yeah. I think we're here today to talk about this and bring that back. And like I said, the moral high ground is a glorious place to be. So you can kind of retake that. Yeah. It's really hard if you feel like you're being personally attacked, but I think if you're able to step back out of it, you're more likely when you're looking back over the conversation to think, I handled that well.
It's fantastic. Anyone want to give any final thoughts or reflections coming out of that? And we have got, by the way, some handouts with basically what we said on it.